Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on this whole cybernetics thing. But
Yeah.
before you start picturing, robots and all that,
Right.
this deep dive is really about how you think, how you understand the world.
Yeah.
It's kind of like exploring the mind-body connection, but with a little bit of a tech twist to it.
Exactly. Yeah, the material you sent over, it really dives into this fascinating overlap of philosophy,
Oh, yeah.
cognitive science, even technology.
It's pretty cool stuff.
It can get a bit dense, but stick with us.
Yeah, it's worth it.
By the end, I promise you'll have a whole new perspective on how your own understanding literally shapes the reality you experience.
So to kick things off, we're jumping into this article called Cybernethics, Existential Inaction, Creative Cognition, and Technological Hermeneutics Toward a Second-Order Rationality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's a mouthful.
It's a doozy.
But the author, Christophe Rigon, he's brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
He gives us a whole new way to think about how we even create meaning.
And how that creation is never really finished.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process,
Oh, it's so true.
not some fixed state.
Okay, so first up on our journey, we've got this thing called creative cognition.
Okay.
It sounds kind of fancy, right? But think of it this way. Every time you learn something new,
Yeah.
you're not just storing a fact away in your brain like it's a file cabinet.
Right.
You're actually building new connections up there in your brain,
Yeah.
Creating this whole new category of understanding.
I like that.
It's like before you knew what cybernetics was, that category didn't even exist in your mind,
Right.
and now it does.
Boom. Now it does.
We just created something.
Exactly. And that's where inaction comes into play.
Okay.
So inaction, it means that we don't just passively absorb the world around us like we're sponges or something.
Yeah,
We're out there interacting with it, testing things out,
totally.
making mistakes even.
Of course, got to make those mistakes.
And it's through that whole process that our understanding, it emerges.
You know what? You don't really get cooking just from reading a cookbook.
No, definitely not.
You got to get in the kitchen, make a mess, burn some stuff,
Exactly.
and then that's when the knowledge, it becomes real.
Right. You embody it.
Embodied knowledge. Love it.
So Rigon, he even takes this idea a step further and compares it to how AI is trained, artificial intelligence.
Okay, yeah.
Think of your brain not like a computer with all these neat files and folders.
Yeah.
But like this massive network that's constantly rewiring itself
Oh,
based on your experiences.
that's pretty wild.
And that's actually how he describes this thing called the PDP model, or parallel distributed processing.
So my brain's less like my phone and more like the entire internet.
Exactly.
Constantly evolving, making new connections.
That's it.
That's both amazing and a little bit scary to think about.
It is. But it really highlights the power we have.
Yeah.
We're not fixed beings. Our understanding is constantly evolving.
Okay.
And that's where this idea of second-order thinking comes in.
Okay, I'll be honest. This one sounded a bit intimidating at first
Yeah.
when I first saw it, but the way you explained it makes so much sense.
Okay.
It's about stepping back from your thoughts and being like, okay, why do I actually believe this?
Right.
Or what assumptions am I making here?
Exactly. You're questioning the thought process behind the thought itself.
Yeah.
And Reagan, he makes this point that there's no such thing as a third-order thinking.
Okay.
That would just be an infinite loop of analyzing.
And your brain would melt.
It would just be too much.
Yeah.
Second-order thinking.
Yeah.
It's about getting to the core of your beliefs, not endlessly questioning them.
Think about it. Have you ever had a really strong opinion about something and then later you realize it was based on totally outdated information?
Oh, all the time.
That's a lack of second-order thinking right there.
Totally.
We all do it.
Yeah.
But by recognizing it, we can be more open to new information, to changing our minds even.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And to help with all of this, Reagan actually recommends using tools like mind maps,
Okay.
which he calls his brain, by the way, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's about visually organizing your thoughts
Yeah.
to really see how they connect.
So it's not just about thinking deeply. You got to find ways to map those thoughts out.
Exactly.
To really see the bigger picture. It's
Yeah.
kind of like if you're looking up at the stars, it just looks like a jumble, but then you draw those lines, make constellations,
Yeah, you see the pattern.
and suddenly you see the pattern. That's powerful stuff.
It is. And sometimes those patterns, you start to see some tensions,
Oh, yeah.
some contradictions in our thinking,
Okay.
And that leads us to this idea of conceptual dipoles, which is,
Conceptual dipoles. All right. That sounds a little complicated, but lay it on me.
it's not as bad as it sounds.
Okay.
just think about it this way. Like, we often understand things in pairs, right?
Okay.
Like light and dark, hot and cold.
Yeah. Opposites.
Exactly. Opposites. And Rigon calls these conceptual dipoles. And they're not just opposites. They actually kind of depend on each other, you know?
Right.
You can't have one without the other.
So, like, I wouldn't understand what success means unless I also had some concept of failure.
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
Okay.
And here's where Rigon gets really interesting. He says that we should actually focus on the weak side of the dipole.
The weak side.
The one that's harder to grasp, the one that we're kind of, like, uncomfortable with.
So instead of focusing on what makes me feel successful, I should spend more time thinking about my failures.
Yes.
Exactly.
Why would I do that?
Because by really wrestling with those harder concepts, you know, the ones that we usually try to avoid,
Yeah.
we actually gain a much deeper understanding of the whole pair.
Okay.
It's like if you only ever look at the sunny side of a mountain,
Right.
you'll never really understand its full form, its terrain, you know?
Yeah.
You got to explore the shadows, too. Okay, I can see that. It's about getting comfortable with the stuff we usually avoid, yeah.
Yeah, and by doing that, we can unlock a more nuanced perspective.
But how does all of this relate back to that whole idea that my understanding shapes reality thing? Like, how does this dipole stuff actually affect the world around me?
That's where Reagan's concept of the processual dimension comes into play.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, this one's a bit of a head scratcher.
They're all head scratchers.
It might sound abstract, but think of it like this. You're not just this, like, static collection of facts and beliefs, right?
You're right.
You're constantly changing, evolving, and that flow of experience, that's the processual dimension.
So instead of thinking about, like, a snapshot, a still image, I need to think about a video, you know, with the constant movement and change that makes up my life.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And Rigon points out that our brains, they love to cling to forms, to categories, to things we can easily define.
Right. Makes sense.
But that's not how reality actually works.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is messy, it's fluid, it's in constant motion.
It's like trying to hold water in your hand, you know? You can tup it for a second, but it's always slipping through, changing shape.
Exactly. Perfect analogy.
So how do we even begin to grasp this whole processual dimension thing if our brains are kind of wired for the opposite, if they want to categorize and make things neat and tidy?
Well, this is where Rigon draws some parallels to Buddhist philosophy, specifically the concept of shunyata,
Okay.
often translated as emptiness.
Emptiness. That sounds a little nihilistic, no?
It's not about nothingness. It's about recognizing the potential for everything, the constant flux of reality where nothing is truly fixed or permanent.
Whoa, okay, that's deep.
So by embracing that impermanence, that emptiness in the Buddhist sense,
Yeah.
we can actually open ourselves up to a much greater understanding.
So we let go of trying to control everything and just be open to the flow.
Exactly. But
Okay.
I'm starting to get it.
And you know where this all ties back to? Technology. Hold on, wait a minute. We spent a good chunk of time talking about how technology can actually reinforce that rigid, mechanistic thinking.
Right.
That whole seeing ourselves as machines thing. So how can it help us see this fluidity, this processual dimension you're talking about?
Because technology itself is constantly evolving, right?
Think about it. The way you use technology today is completely different from even 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a perfect example of this processual dimension in action, always changing, always adapting.
So by observing how technology changes, how it adapts, how it becomes obsolete even,
Right.
we can actually gain a better understanding of how change operates in every aspect of life, not just in the tech world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by understanding that, we can become more comfortable with uncertainty,
Okay.
with the fact that there's not always a clear answer, a fixed solution.
Which is a pretty valuable skill to have in today's world, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Things are changing faster than ever. Embracing the processual dimension. It's not just about understanding the world. It's about being adaptable, resilient, and able to navigate the constant flow of change.
So if we can learn to see technology as a reflection of that constant change, maybe we can use it to enhance our understanding rather than limit it.
I think that's the key.
But that requires a whole new way of thinking about our relationship with technology, doesn't it?
It does. It's about recognizing that technology is a tool, an extension of ourselves, not something separate that controls us.
But we still need to be aware of the potential pitfalls, right?
Of course, of course.
You're talking about that mechanistic resonance again, that danger of getting so caught up in technology that we start to see the world in these purely mechanical terms.
It's a valid concern, but I think Rigon is actually quite optimistic about technology.
Okay.
He sees it as a form of what he calls externalized gesture.
Externalized gesture.
It means that technology actually embodies our own thinking processes in a physical form.
So our technology is basically a reflection of our own internal world, our ways of thinking and interacting with the world.
Exactly.
It's like our thoughts made physical.
And even something as simple as writing, he argues, has profoundly shaped our cognitive evolution.
Great. Yeah.
It's a way of like decentering ourselves.
Decentering, what do you mean by that?
It means we're putting our thoughts outside of our own minds, making them tangible.
So it's like technology isn't replacing our minds, it's actually expanding them, giving us new ways to express and explore our thoughts.
Precisely.
That's a really cool way to look at it.
And with the rise of AI and algorithms, this decentering is happening at an unprecedented rate.
Right, it's moving so fast.
Which is why it's more important than ever to be mindful of what we create and how we use it.
So how do we find that balance then? How do we harness the power of technology without falling into that trap of mechanistic thinking?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Is there a way to actually use technology to enhance our understanding of this processual dimension, the fluidity of reality?
That's what we need to figure out.
And that, my friend, brings us to the final part of our deep dive.
All right, let's do it.
Are you ready to explore some potential answers, some ways to navigate this complex landscape?
I am. Let's dive in.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We have covered so much ground in this cybernetics thing.
Yeah.
From how our brains make meaning to this whole wild idea of the processual dimension, like reality is always changing, always flow.
A lot to take in.
It is. And we talked about how technology, well, it can kind of lead to rigid thinking, but it can also be like this powerful tool for understanding that flow.
Right, it's a double-edged sword.
So in this last part, let's get practical. You've shared all this incredible material with us.
Yeah.
How can we actually use this stuff, these cybernetic principles, like in our everyday lives?
Okay.
Because it can feel, I don't know, a bit overwhelming, right? Knowing that our understanding shapes reality, but it's also being shaped by all these forces we might not even realize are acting on us.
It's true. It can be both exhilarating and a bit daunting, as you said.
Yeah.
But I think that's where the tools we've been talking about come in.
Yeah.
Like that second-order thinking we keep coming back to.
Right. Asking ourselves, why do I believe this?
Exactly.
What am I missing here?
Yeah. It's almost like becoming aware of the software our brains are running on, not just the content on the screen, like you were saying before.
Totally.
And using tools like mind maps, as Rigon suggests, can really help us to see those patterns in our thinking.
Yeah.
Remember how he calls his mind map his brain?
Oh, yeah.
It shows that it's not just random thoughts floating around. It's about actively organizing those thoughts to see the connections, the bigger picture.
Okay, so we're using second-order thinking to become more aware.
Right.
But then what? How do we actually, shift those patterns to create, a better reality? It's like, great, I see the problem, but now what do I do about it?
Well, remember those conceptual dipoles we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
Rigon's advice, it's to pay attention to that weak side,
Yeah.
The things that make us uncomfortable, the aspects of reality that are harder to pin down.
So, if my dipole is success versus failure, instead of just focusing on all the things that make me feel successful, I should actually, spend time reflecting on my failures. The times things didn't work out. That seems a little counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It might seem that way at first, but by wrestling with those more difficult concepts, the stuff we usually try to avoid, we actually gain a much deeper, more balanced understanding.
Okay.
It's like, if you only ever look at the sunny side of a mountain, you'll never truly understand its terrain.
Right, you miss all the shadows, all the valleys.
You got to explore those too.
Okay, I can see that. It's about embracing the discomfort to get a more complete picture.
Yeah.
But how does this all connect back to that processual dimension thing?
Right. Because if I'm being honest, that's the part that still feels a little, I don't know, slippery.
Okay. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Tricky.
Think of it this way. Imagine you're watching a river flow.
Okay.
Your brain, it wants to focus on a single snapshot,
Yeah.
a specific bend in the river. But the processual dimension, that's the entire flow, the constant movement, the change.
So it's not about fixating on one particular moment, but seeing how all the moments are connected, kind of flowing into each other.
Exactly. And Ribbon points out that our brains, they're wired to cling to those snapshots, to fixed categories.
Right. We like to put things in boxes.
But reality is always in motion.
Yeah.
It's like that river constantly changing. We need to learn to see the flow, not just the frozen image.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we shift our thinking from snapshots to the flow? It's one thing to understand it intellectually, but actually experiencing it, feeling it, that seems like a whole other challenge.
It is a challenge, but it's possible.
Regan suggests that practices like mindfulness and meditation can help us become more attuned to this constant change.
Oh, interesting.
It's about cultivating a present moment awareness, noticing those subtle shifts and changes that are always happening, both inside us and in the world around us.
So it's like instead of just focusing on getting to the destination, we start to appreciate the journey itself,
Yeah.
all the twists and turns along the way.
Exactly. And by doing that, we can start to let go of those rigid attachments we have, our beliefs, our expectations, and we become more adaptable, more resilient when faced with change.
That makes a lot of sense. And this brings us back to technology because it seems like technology can either help or hinder this whole process, right?
Absolutely. Technology can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it can reinforce that tendency to focus on snapshots, on fixed categories that we were talking about.
Right.
But on the other hand, it can be a powerful tool for understanding the processual dimension if we use it in a mindful way.
So how do we do that? How can we actually use technology to enhance our understanding of the flow instead of getting stuck in that rigid mechanistic thinking?
Well, one way is to start seeing technology itself as an embodiment of the processual dimension.
Oh,
Think about how quickly technology changes and evolves.
yeah.
The phone you have in your pocket right now is already vastly different from the phones we were using just a few years ago.
It's crazy how fast it changes.
It is. It's a perfect example of constant change of the processual dimension in action.
So by observing how technology evolves, adapts, becomes obsolete even,
Right.
we can actually get a better understanding of how change operates in like every aspect of life, not just the tech world.
Exactly. And that understanding can help us become more comfortable with uncertainty,
Yeah.
with not always having a clear answer, a fixed solution.
Which, let's be real, is a crucial skill to have in today's world.
Absolutely. Things are changing faster than ever.
It seems like a lot of the anxiety people have about technology, it comes from this resistance to change, this desire to cling to what's familiar.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But if we can embrace the processual nature of technology itself, maybe we can start to see it as an ally, not a threat.
And that's where cybernetics comes full circle. It's about understanding that we are not separate from technology.
Right.
It's an extension of ourselves, a reflection of our own thinking processes.
So it's not about rejecting technology, becoming Luddites or something.
No, not at all.
It's about using it consciously, ethically,
Right?
and in a way that enhances our understanding of the world and
I
ourselves.
love that.
And it's about recognizing that technology, it's not a static entity. It's constantly evolving, just like we are. And by embracing that evolution, by actively participating in the process,
Yeah.
we can shape technology in a way that aligns with our values, with our humanity.
That's a powerful message. So to wrap things up for our listeners, what's like one key takeaway they can walk away with from this whole cybernetics deep dive? I think the most important takeaway is this. Your understanding shapes your reality. But that understanding, it's not fixed.
Okay.
It's constantly evolving through your experiences, your interactions, even your relationship with technology.
Right.
So be mindful of the information you consume, the tools you use, the questions you ask,
Yeah,
because by actively shaping your understanding, you are actively shaping your reality.
that's such a good point to end on.
It's all about taking control.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've explored everything from how our brains work to Buddhist philosophy and the future of technology. I feel like I've learned a whole new language for understanding myself and the world.
That's great to hear.
Hopefully our listeners feel the same way.
I hope so too, because cybernetics, it's not just some academic theory.
Right.
It's a framework for living, for navigating this complex world with more awareness, more resilience, and more agency.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into cybernetics. And until next time, keep those brains firing. And remember, your understanding shapes your reality. Choose wisely.